So in my last video, we talked about diastasis recti, what it is, and how to test for it. So today I'm gonna give my top 3 tips and tricks on how to potentially close the gap, but more so reduce your low back pain, ease your digestion, and connect to your core more, which is ultimately the symptoms of diastasis recti. So the first thing is actually breathing, believe it or not. A lot of my clients along the way have learned some very interesting breathing patterns, and I don't know if it's just a compensation technique or allergies, obstructed nasal passages, all of it. It all comes into play with breathing. So my favorite type of breathing that I teach to actually feel the core, I'm gonna say core, we're talking about like our abdomen, low back, waist area, kick on, is what I call CHEHA breathing. So we also used to like fog our hands when it's cold out, you know, like to heat them up. It's the same sort of fogging breath, like when you fog a mirror, that's the sound that you're making. So if you just take a deep breath in, and then CHEHA, and try to prolong it for as long as possible, you'll feel sort of a natural gathering of your waist and ribs and abdominals. Yeah, so play with that a little bit. So you inhale, and then exhale. You have a little bit of an open mouth, release in the jaw. And you can hear it's a little bit audible. In yoga, it's called ujjayi breathing, where it's like through the nose. I particularly like opening the mouth, opening the jaw. It relates to the pelvic floor, and have like a little bit of an audible exhale. And just try it one more time. Inhale, and then CHEHA, and feel that natural gathering. So if you're gonna go say exercise, lift weights, do what you're gonna do, layer in that form of breathing, especially breathe like that, empty out a little bit, like 30 to 50%, and then start to do whatever you're going to do. So if I'm gonna do bicep curls, I'm gonna CHEHA about 30%, and then I'm gonna do the exertion phase of the bicep curl. Inhaling and then exhale, pull. So that my abdominals have the opportunity to actually come together, weave together through my breath before I start to load them through a sit-up or an arm exercise or a squat. Yeah, okay, so number 2, I've talked about this before, it's my favorite butt ball, but your pelvic floor, the base of your pelvis is like a super highway. The tissues from the front of the body wrap through the base. The back of the body wraps up the front, the side, so everything sort of interconnects at the base of your pelvis. So if that gets tight, it can also pull on the tissues of the abdomen, causing a potential diastasis. So my favorite butt ball, it's like a deflated soft ball. If you sit on it, I'm gonna scooch back a little bit. If you can't sit on the floor cross-legged, that's fine. You just sit on a chair, like a dining room chair where your feet are flat. And you practice that same CHEHA breathing. So you inhale and CHEHA, feeling that natural core sitting. At the very tail end of your breath, it almost feels like a cough or a sputtering car, like, and you can again feel that gathering. So you just inhale and breathe out with an CHEHA. And you keep repeating that while sitting on the ball, and what you're going to do is relax and release the fascia of the pelvic floor, and it will actually help encourage the diastasis to gather and come back together, and also release the tighter tissues surrounding the site. So that's a pretty quick, easy, simple thing. So lastly is actually about where you place your upper torso, specifically your rib cage. And when I learned this through nutritious movement, it was the most eye-opening thing that I'd ever learned in all of my Pilates and gyrotonic education, or lack thereof. So I'm gonna stand side, or I'm gonna kneel sideways. So get my arm out of the way. When I'm just upright and vertical, you may be able to see my rib cage let's use this guy, has a natural slant. Like if I put the brick on the bottom floating ribs, it's actually running along this angle. If I took the brick and I put it on my sternum, also from a side vantage point, you can see how the slant of the brick is like this. So that basically indicates that my upper thoracic, my rib cage, and my upper torso are not neutral. They're in extension. I've essentially done a mini back bend with my upper back and have stayed there. So to all my dancers, gymnasts, anybody who's been told to stand up straight, that tends to be a hypercorrection where the ribs end up kind of going into this arched position. So you have to do the exact opposite to correct it. And when you do that, your ribs will then stack over your pelvis, which gives your abdominals better organization to actually fire, as opposed to always living in like a little bit of an overstretched position. So what I have to do, it's a 3-part process. I'll use the brick again because you can see that pretty well. Step 1 is I need to derotate. I don't think that's a word, but you're going to think of curling and rounding your chest forward, because if I'm doing like a back dive, I need to do a forward dive into the swimming pool, like a bow with my sternum and chest. So that's step 1. Step 2, I need to slide my ribs back, because when they're like this, they're a little sitting forward in my body. And if I come down, that's not enough. I actually need my ribs to slide backward. So as I do that, you can start to see that my upper back starts filling out. And then the last image I have is if there's a hook under my bra line, I'm gonna pull that hook like a conveyor belt up to the ceiling. So I've got a little bit of length and traction, and believe it or not, this is a neutral, get my arm out of the way, this is a neutral rib cage. So if I take my brick, now if it's on my ribs, it's pointing straight ahead, it's not angled upward. So my comfortable position, too much dance and gymnastics over the years. 2, step 1, you slouch. I know it feels horrible internally, but I promise from an abdominal standpoint, it's lining everything up better. And then I slide my ribs back so they're truly over my pelvis, and then I traction my back of my ribs up to the ceiling. And when I do that, I can actually feel my floating ribs and my hip bones stacking like 2 blocks right on top of one another. And then it again allows my abdominal wall to be sort of like in a prepared position, so that when I go to load it, it's like ready to go. If I do it from an overstretched position over and over and over again, it's sort of, what's the word? It's working the dysfunction, I would say, of being a little overstretched, and then if I load it, I'm just gonna keep opening the gap potentially. But if I can bring my rib cage directly over my pelvis and then start to do my bicep curls or my squats or my lunges or whatever I'm doing, I'm in an optimal abdominal position to then load, not overstretched. When you're stacked, you can kind of feel, again, that CHEHA breathing. It's like everything's sort of organized and ready to go. So, quick review. Breathe, CHEHA. Sit on your deflated butt ball to let your pelvic floor and fascia release. And then try to find a neutral rib cage. Sometimes in nutritious movement, they call it drop your ribs. I don't think that's enough. You have to drop them into a slouch, slide them back, and then traction them up to the ceiling and play around with what that feels like internally for you when you go to layer on your exercises for it. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, let me know. As somebody who's dealt with this for well over 7 years, because that's how old my son almost is, yeah, it's been really interesting. So let me know. Hopefully you got some good information from this, and I'll see you soon.